Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of our Comp 1 class, English 1100. This week you'll plan and write a complete draft of Project 1. Try to enjoy the drafting process. Remember, you're not starting from scratch. You've already done lots of pre-writing, and much of that pre-writing can probably make its way right into your draft. Check out the Student Success Gallery for some inspiration. And just for good measure, one more reminder that it's good practice to click through all of the screens in a module at the beginning of each week, skimming them to get a sense of what you'll be working toward. Then create a plan for your week, figure out which days you'll do each task. If you don't have some sort of calendar or planner, I strongly recommend that you get one. It's a very good way to keep track of the things that you need to do. For task 3.1, as per usual, you have some readings to do. Please read chapter 30, which is on drafting, chapter 42, which is on describing, chapter 43, which is on dialogue, and chapter 57 on designing text. The first 3 chapters will help you get your stories down and integrate description and dialogue into them. Pay particular attention to the sections on detail, vantage point, and rhetorical situations. Also, carefully review the info about how to paragraph and punctuate dialogue. The last chapter will help you make choices about designing your document effectively. In task 3.2, you're going to consider your rhetorical situation. Begin by reviewing your earlier pre-writing, so the pre-writing that you did last week, then write out responses to the following prompts. First of all, we have audience purpose and stance. Who is your audience? Certainly the class is part of the audience, but are there other people that you want to reach? And how will those people react to your stories? What will they need to know in order to fully understand or appreciate the stories? And what will keep them interested? What stance do you want to take as a narrator? And the tone as well. Do you want to be funny, ironic, playful, critical, thoughtful, and so on? And what's your overall purpose in sharing the stories? What threads of your identity do you want your readers to know about? Next, we have genre. This is a narrative collage. How many vignettes do you want to include? In what order should they be told? Should you weave the stories in and out like a soap opera does, or should you tell one story, finish it, and move on to the next? What verb tense will you use for each of your vignettes? Present tense, so that your readers will feel a sense of immediacy, or past tense, which is what we typically use when we tell stories. I would recommend using the same verb tense in each of your vignettes. It could get a little bit confusing if you change up your verb tense between the different stories. What can you do in your opening sentences to engage your readers and make them want to keep reading? Could you begin in the middle of the story? Could you begin with some dialogue? Could you possibly begin with the end of the story? There are lots of things you can do to make your stories interesting and engaging to your readers. How do you want to end your collage? Should you frame the collage by referring back to something from the beginning? Can you leave your readers with something to ponder or think about? Can you reflect on the meaning of your stories without sounding like you are tacking on a moral at the end? For your media and design, how can you cue readers that one vignette is ending and another is beginning? Should you use headings? If so, what would those headings be? And should you use other design elements to indicate a shift in topic or in the timeline of your story? What spacing would be most effective of your paragraphs? What kind of font should you use that would best go along with the stories that you're telling? And are there photos or videos or other sorts of visuals you can add to help augment your work? And finally, getting some help. What might you need to do to get help in creating your collage? Describe scenes vividly, use dialogue, draft, revise, other things. And look at the brief menu at the front of the field guide and at the table of contents as well. What 2 chapters or sections of the book might serve as good resources for you as you work on your project? I know that there is a lot here, but try your best to respond to each of these prompts and each aspect of the prompt. You'll see that many of these prompts actually contain multiple questions for each bullet point. If you skip over some of the prompts or some of the questions, you will stand to lose some points in this activity. As a tip, check out the Student Success Gallery for week 3 for examples of how other people have responded to these prompts. For task 3.3, you are going to write your draft. Use the resources available to you. Go back to last week's pre-writing to get started. Reread the assignment description to remind yourself what your goal is. Reread last week's writing samples. Look at the Student Success Gallery. Reread your responses to the planning your drafts activity from this week. Look at the field guide chapters that we've been going over. There are lots of things available to you to get some help. And then open up a document and start writing. As a side note, if you want any help drafting your paper, the people at the Writing Center are excellent at that. They are all people who have experience, lots of experience with writing and or teaching writing. Many of them work for the English department. I actually work virtually in the Writing Centers on Friday. So if you ever want to work with me directly on your writing, I work in the online Writing Center from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. every Friday. Task 3.4 is deciding on the format and design for your document. As you're drafting, remember that for this assignment, the format and design, the overall look of your document is up to you. You get to choose the font, typeface, line spacing, etc. You may even choose to include images in your document if you want. As you're deciding on matters of design, think back to the sample collages you read last week. Some used extra space between vignettes to cue the readers to let them know that a new vignette was starting. Some used asterisks centered on the page. Sometimes writers of collages use headings or numbers or pictures to separate their vignettes. Those are all examples of design choices you might make. Sometimes students experiment with color or font style as well. For instance, a writer might tell one story in a regular font and then use italics to visually distinguish the next vignette. Again, this is up to you. Be sure to consider who your audience is. If you go too crazy with different typefaces or colors, readers might become confused or annoyed. Experiment with things, try different things out, see what works best for you, see which most effectively lines up with the goal of the assignment. Task 3.5, experimenting with your draft. As you work on your draft, consider experimenting a little bit. Often it's helpful as you draft to experiment with your writing just for the fun of it, just to see what happens. Maybe you could convert a section of your draft entirely to dialogue, or change from past tense to present, or start at the end of a story and work back to the beginning, or slow down and enlarge a scene by bringing every moment to life. Many of the vignettes you read in Task 2.6 were written by students who experimented with their writing. For example, Brian Y. decided to slow down and enlarge just one line from his original draft. That line was, "And then we put on our gas masks." When he slowed down and tried to imagine every detail of putting on the gas masks, he came up with this. And I'll let you read that on your own. Brian Y. liked what he came up with during this experiment and decided to keep it in his final draft. Maybe you'll experiment and you won't like what comes from it, and that's perfectly fine. But there's also a chance that you'll love it and it will be worth incorporating into your paper. Task 3.6, you're going to make your week 3/4 discussion board post. You only have one post due this week. You've probably heard me say that almost every week you will have a post on Wednesday and Friday. This is one of those exceptions. By Sunday at 11:59, you're going to post your completed Project 1 draft to the discussion board. You can copy and paste your draft into the thread text box if you want, although my recommendation is to attach a Microsoft Word document. The text box can sometimes make your paper look weird. It can mess with the formatting and stuff. Oftentimes, it's just easier to type it up in a separate document and then upload that document to the discussion board thread. At the top of the text box, when you submit your draft, I'd like you to make notes in response to the following. What are you struggling with in your draft? What's going well? What specifically do you want feedback on? And how did you experiment in your drafting? What did you try? Did you like it? And did you keep it? Why or why not? You do not have to make any other posts this week. Next week, you'll be reading and peer reviewing your classmates' drafts. Finally, you are going to submit your week 3 work. By Sunday at 11:59, you are going to submit 2 things. Make sure that you submit both. There are 2 things due this week. You're going to be submitting all the writing you produced in response to task 3.2. That was your responses to the considering your rhetorical situation. And you're also going to submit your draft, which you completed for task 3.3. Now, you're going to submit the draft in 2 places. You're submitting it to both the discussion board and directly to me. You're submitting it to the discussion board so that your peers can see what you wrote. You're submitting it directly to me because that's a little bit easier for me to access it and to grade you for that. So make sure you submit both things. You only have 1 discussion board post this week. That pretty well covers it. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Be more than happy to help you out.